My name is David Ruffin, and these are the Temptations. Y'all know we love using that specific quote here on this channel. And finally, the time has come where we can make it make sense. Established from the iconic yet controversial Motown Records, Berry Gordy gave 5 talented young black men the chance at complete superstardom. Superstardom is what they'd accomplished in the early 60s, spinning the singles Cloud 9, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, the forever soulful My Girl, and dozens of more hits. Headed by the even more controversial David Ruffin. David honchoed himself in front of the Tempts, establishing himself as that ninja, and didn't give a hoot nanny who had something to say about it. His time spent with the Tempts was cut short just a few years later, and his life would be cut even shorter after what reports say was an accidental overdose. But supposedly, that just isn't correct. Perhaps, maybe. The raspy throat tenor born in the rural area of Wynot, Mississippi, to Ophelia and Elias Ruffin, a Baptist minister who worked as a truck driver and shared residency with 3 of David's siblings. When David was younger, his parents moved from Jim Crow, Alabama to Yeehaw, Mississippi due to the aftermath of the Civil War. His grandfather, John Ruffin, was a Civil War veteran, while Daddy Ruffin was uber strict and abusive. I'm talking Joe Jackson whenever Michael began choreo with his left instead of his right foot abusive. David's mama, on the other hand, unfortunately passed away soon after his birth in 1941, and his pops had soon married just a year later to a teacher named Earlene. Traveling with his parents was a routine that David and his siblings got used to, given that he and his kinfolk operated as a family gospel group. I know what you're thinking. Gospel? Tuh. Yes, gospel. Mahalia Jackson, amongst others, were just a few of the names they opened for. Preparing for his breakout and his relatives' only music doo-wop, the choir over at Mount Salem Methodist Church and talent shows were a great practice to warm up those vocals. By the age of 14, David up and left his home with the help of a minister named Eddie Bush to go to Memphis, Tennessee in hopes of becoming a minister himself. By the following year, Hot Springs, Arkansas would become David's next destination. He, under the moniker Little David, along with Phineas Newborn Sr., a jazz musician, played at the 50 Grand Ballroom and Casino. He continued to sing at talent shows and briefly sang with the Soul Stirrers following Johnny Taylor's exit. Gospel was his first choice, but noticing how some of his faves like Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson went the more secular route, David thought he too would get on his secular grind. Minister Eddie Bush, along with his wife, later took David, now 16, to Detroit, Michigan, where his brother Jimmy had been pursuing a music career while also working at the Ford Motor Company. There in Detroit, David recorded his first ever records, You and I and Believe Me. Then later that decade, in the year 1957, David finally met Berry Gordy before he was known as the founder of Motown. Berry was just a songwriter at that time, with goals of finally running his own record label. Still very much a minor, David went to live with Berry's father, who aided in the reconstruction of what would soon become Hitsville, USA, the headquarters for Tamla Records, that would later be renamed to what we know as Motown. David's brother Jimmy would get signed as an artist over at Motown, joining his brother. The two were living the dream and even got to work alongside Marvin Gaye. On the other side of the label, the Elgins had established taking turns trying and retrying out lead vocalist and frontmen to lead what would later be renamed to the Temptations. David eventually met up with them after Jimmy Ruffin had gone on a review tour with the Tempts and notified his brother that the group needed someone to sing tenor, and thus it was born. The Temptations were doing their thing, or whatever, pre-David, but once David joined, they were back at it like a crack addict. In 1964, he'd become an official member after their founding member, Elbridge Bryant, was fired. In fact, both David and his brother Jimmy both auditioned to be the Temptations frontman, but they ended up going with David as he performed with them on stage during their label's New Year's Eve party. David didn't come out of the gate swinging like most thought he did. Initially, he sang backup, while Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams alternated as lead vocalists. David's voice did get the chance to shine on a few tracks on stage and in the studio. However, the label thought his leads just weren't good enough. The man behind the pen, Smokey Robinson, wasn't going for none of that, as it was he who thought David's voice was liquid gold. Seeing that what the Tempts were doing music-wise wasn't in line with David's vocal style, Smokey decided to use his skills to acquire a song around David's vocal style, and it would become the hit that keeps on hitting. I've got sunshine on a cloudy day. Smokey described Ruffin as a sleeping giant, mellow yet gruff. My Girl went on to become the Temptations' first #1 record in the year 1965, and would later, as we all know, become their most recognized song to date. The transformation of the Tempts was no easy road, but alas, they discovered a frontman that checked every box. Up next came Since I Lost My Baby, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Beauty is Skin Deep, and more, all led by David. And needless to say, all the accolades and worldwide recognition may have gone to David's head just a bit. And by a bit, I mean a lot. Ruffin's 6-foot-something tall, chocolatey goodness declared everyone's attention as he performed. He was a performer, passionate, dramatic, and overall fantastic, that lured Temptation fans, capturing the hearts of the masses. David not only brought his vocal talents to the group, he also contributed to the group's four-headed mic stand signature. By the time 1966-67 rolled around, the group noticed that David's head was entirely too far up his own behind, because dude was walking around like he was the Temptations. Just him, all by himself. The rest of the original four, Paul, Otis, Melvin, and Eddie, were nothing but the help, according to David. Especially Otis, because as we all know, ain't nobody came to see him. By 1967, David's entitlement and ego was too far in the way. It became too much for the group to bear. Cocaine addiction would come next, causing him to miss rehearsals and performances. His customized travel vehicle of choice was a limo stained with a trademark image of himself and those signature black-rimmed glasses painted on the side of the door. Following the lead of fellow Motown group The Supremes, led by Diana Ross, when the Supremes officially changed their name to Diana Ross and the Supremes, David wanted to do the same, wanting to change the Tempts' name to David Ruffin and the Temptations. Otis especially wasn't having none of that. On top of David trying to bulldoze his way to the front as if he weren't in the front already, he then began to inquire into the Tempts' finances, causing a rift between him and Gordy. By the time summer of '68 came about, the Temptations all agreed that David had crossed the line for the last time after missing a June show in Cleveland, Ohio, in favor of attending a performance of his new boo. On June 27th, David was officially fired, ending his run as the Temptations' leading man, replaced by Dennis Edwards, a friend of Ruffin's and the other Tempts. Originally satisfied that he was replaced by Dennis, David started showing up to Dennis's first performances with the group unannounced. And when they began to perform their hits like My Girl and all the other David-led tracks, David would walk smooth across the stage, snatching the microphone from Dennis's hand and take over the whole show. You already know the audience was going wild as they didn't expect David to show up. This must be part of the show, right? Wrong. The group was very much embarrassed, but the fans were here for it. Feeding off the fans' hoots and hollers, the Temptations decided to drop Edwards and give Ruffin another chance. But when he showed up late to what was supposed to be his comeback show in Maryland, they ultimately decided to drop him like a bad habit yet again. The women in and out of David's life were far in between many. He was married twice, his first being to Sandra Barnes, who shares 3 daughters with Ruffin, and Joy Hamilton, a son shared with long-term girlfriend Jenna Sapia, and a book also published by Jenna, a memoir titled David Ruffin, My Temptation, detailing David's infidelity and abusive behavior. In 1966, David began to date singer-songwriter Tammy Terrell, who too was beaten like a bongo drum by Ruffin. According to witnesses, David and Tammy's relationship was incredibly violent. One incident even claims he hit her in the head with a folding chair and even a hammer. And as his drug habit became worse, so did the violence. One day out of the blue, David surprised her with a marriage proposal, and Tammy was swooning with delight until she announced her engagement on stage and quickly learned that dude was already married to his first baby's mother. Tammy called it quits when David took one final swing at her, cracking her upside the head with his motorcycle helmet. Tammy would then go on to tell Ebony magazine in 1969 that although she developed migraines since her childhood years, she believed that the emotional state she was in during her and David's little union was a contributing factor. Not too long after, Tammy had tragically died from a brain tumor in 1970, leading many to believe that the blows she suffered from Ruffin was a contributing factor. David Ruffin tragically passed away on June 1st, 1991, after collapsing at a West Philadelphia crack house he'd gone to with a friend who then drove David to the hospital where he'd be pronounced deceased at 3:55 a.m., completing a month-long tour with Dennis Edwards and Eddie Kendricks. The cause of death was reported to have been an accidental overdose of crack cocaine. Despite being ruled an accident, Ruffin's family and friends weren't buying it. David had way too many ops out there for those who knew him best to overlook. To make matters worse, supposedly a money belt containing $40K was missing from David's body. If you've watched the Temptations TV miniseries, then you remember the scene where David's beaten body was dumped on the street in front of the hospital where he dies, and his body remained unclaimed in the morgue for a week straight after his passing. Exaggeration? His estate thought so, since they claimed defamation against NBC and others involved with making the series. David's funeral, held at the New Bethel Baptist Church located in Detroit, were the surviving members of the Temptation, Lord knows there ain't that many of them left, passionately sang My Girl. In attendance were guests like Stevie Wonder and Aretha Franklin, who also sang at the funeral. Michael Jackson even volunteered to pay for expenses, but didn't attend. David Ruffin may have been an egotistical jack-in-the-ass-hat, but he was also one of the best who have ever done it, according to the other Temptations and everyone who was anyone. His unique raspy vocals relayed an emotional symphony across the hearts and ears of many, and without David Ruffin, there would be no Temptations. Or, as he would have preferred, David Ruffin and the Temptations. His tenor got him ranked as one of the 100 greatest singers of all time by Rolling Stone magazine, and inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989. Y'all can say whatever you want about David Ruffin, but one thing you can't call him is talentless. Feel free to call him a woman beater. We'll go ahead and give you that. Do you think Ruffin was axed, or was his death entirely accidental? Let us know what you think down below in the comments, and stay tuned for more true celebrity stories.